Spider-Man No Way Home is breaking all kinds of box office records, so today we're going to look back at every single Spider-Man movie and rank them from the worst to the best. Before I properly get started with my rankings today, I want you to start the conversation in the comments below, because that's the most important part, and let me know your ranking for all the Spider-Man movies. And if you like movies and TV, this is the place to be, so make sure you click that subscribe button, and you won't miss any future conversation on your favorite movies and TV, be it movie rankings, TV show reviews, movie reviews, any and everything. Also, I will not be including the Venom movies because they don't have Spider-Man in their universe. They're completely separate, so I will not have them in my ranking, but you do feel free to add them in yours. We'll just be having the Raimi trilogy, the Andrew Garfield movies, Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, and the now completed Home trilogy. Without any further ado, and there will be probable and possible spoilers for every single Spider-Man movie, let's go. Coming in last place, The Amazing Spider-Man 2, a film that is constantly bloated. All its storylines, all the little story threads that are present in it feel entirely disconnected, to the point that they almost don't affect one another, and tonally they are all over the place, which is shown through the character of Peter Parker, because emotionally he's all over the place from one scene to the next. He's pinballing back and forth, and the film does not give him a consistent arc with consistent pacing and consistent beats for his character. While there are good aspects about this film, like the visual effects are fantastic, the suit is a major improvement over the suit from the original Amazing Spider-Man, and the chemistry between Andrew Garfield and Emma Stone is still there. The writing for the characters just does not help. Also, they completely and utterly destroy what makes Spider-Man so special when they try to explain this whole thing that Peter Parker's dad was doing with the blood and experimenting on his blood, and that's why the spider, instead of killing him when it bit him, gave him powers, and it just completely ruins what makes Peter Parker as Spider-Man so special. The death of Gwen Stacy scene, it's a good scene. It's very well executed, and we feel that because we care for the relationship established in the previous film, but it's also just a reminder of how much better it could have been had the entire film been more consistent and just overall better quality-wise. Coming in next, The Amazing Spider-Man, not too far off its successor. While I think this film has good ideas, it just has a muddled execution, where in the writing and tonally tries to be the Dark Knight and tries to divert itself from the original Raimi movies. It essentially, when it comes to the beats of the characters, it does exactly and almost the same thing, which is perfectly fine had they steered into it and not tried to steer away from it while doing exactly that. The chemistry between Emma Stone and Andrew Garfield is stellar in this. They work very well together, and Gwen Stacy and Peter Parker are both likable. This is not exactly the version of Peter Parker that I like. He's a little bit too cool to be Peter Parker, but the performances are great. I love the relationship between them. I love the relationship established and developed between Spider-Man and Captain George Stacy as well. The villain is also just alright at best. He wants to turn people into lizards. Not a very compelling motivation, but we do get to see Spider-Man going through the beats that do make him Spider-Man, even though eventually we know where that leads to with the parents, which we already talked about. So it's an unfortunate mixed bag that never finds its own unique identity amongst the plethora of Spider-Man movies. Coming in next, Spider-Man 3, a film that has a ton of issues in common with The Amazing Spider-Man. We have a ton of storylines that don't necessarily correlate to one another, long enough at least, but tonally they're more consistent, and I find the ideas very compelling. It just doesn't have the best execution at all. While I really like the struggle of Peter Parker throughout this film with MJ and how the pressures of being Spider-Man and being Peter Parker are accumulating too much where he cannot balance him, I also find that the film goes about these beats and this storyline in a very weird way. Like, it's Peter Parker who chooses to kiss Gwen Stacy. Obviously, that's going to piss your girlfriend off. Rightfully so. And the addition of New Goblin and the insistence on adding him to these storylines, there are so many going on right now, it just never flows right. It just never feels like it organically belongs there, especially because they take away all the advancements that we've had between Spider-Man 1 through Spider-Man 2 and now into this one, as Harry just loses his memory, and then instead of being the exact same character, he goes about it in this very Norman Osborn-y kind of way, with playing mind games with Peter, having MJ break up with him, and that just doesn't feel like it's what Harry would do. It always feels like, oh yes, this is a very Norman Osborn thing, but Norman Osborn and Harry Osborn are very different things. The whole Sandman storyline is the one thing that works in this film, and that is consistent, and that eventually adds something to Peter's own arc throughout this film. The Venom suit, I think, for the most part works, but then we didn't need Venom by the end of this film. We could have just gone Sandman and Goblin, and that's it. It has good ideas, it has compelling arcs and beats for the characters. It just goes around them in very weird ways. Coming in next, the original Sam Raimi Spider-Man. There are quite a few elements of this film that are dated. Campy is not exactly my style, so while I do think that the campiness in this film fits with the world that Sam Raimi created for Spider-Man, it's just not the type of tone that I usually prefer in my films. But this set the bar, this set the tone for so many superhero films, for every iteration of Spider-Man to come, and everyone is on their A game. They made us believe for the first time that superhero movies were very possible on this big budget, and we were able to take them seriously, along with X-Men, which came around generally the same time frame. Tobey Maguire is fantastic in this role. You absolutely buy him as Peter Parker, this nerdy, introverted kid who is thrust upon greatness by mere chance, which is what makes Peter Parker special. You don't exactly buy him as a teenager, but usually you can look past that because the story is so consistent, so tonally on one point throughout the film from beginning to end. Willem Dafoe, still one of the creepiest and best performances ever as the Green Goblin. The duality of this character is so well explored, and the world building in general is stellar. It gives us a ton of character, a ton of important relationships for Peter Parker, for the human side of the character, and then just give us a ton of great action, which again, some of the visual effects are quite a bit dated, but some of the action sequences in this, from the bridge scene to the final fight between Peter Parker and Norman Osborn, where eventually Norman Osborn dies being impaled by his own glider, still one of the most brutal Spider-Man fight sequences in any movie, perhaps still the most brutal, even though there's some competition now with Spider-Man No Way Home. Up next, Spider-Man Homecoming, the first Spider-Man movie in the MCU that brought the character back, first giving us the new iteration. And while it feels like a small-scale story that doesn't exactly stop enough to give us a more intimate Spider-Man being the friendly neighborhood Spider-Man that we know and love, in retrospect, now with the whole trilogy complete, it does make sense. But as a first impression for this Spider-Man, it just isn't small enough, and it might go a little bit too big for a first outing for this Spider-Man. Nevertheless, it finds clearly its own unique charm and identity, being inspired by the John Hughes films. Tom Holland is excellent in this role, and Michael Keaton's Vulture is still one of the best comic book villains in history. He is stellar in this film, and I still remember seeing this film for the first time and getting that surprise when Peter Parker goes to pick up his date for prom, and there is Michael Keaton, and the deafening silence fills the room. It's just a really great, fun, action-packed, humorous adventure for Spider-Man that dives enough into his hero and personal life and the duality and complications that come with it. And in that sense, it explores this character very well. Coming in next, Spider-Man Far From Home. Yet another stellar outing, in my opinion, for Spider-Man in the MCU with his sophomore effort, giving us yet again a great villain in Mysterio. And I will always respect and admire this film for the fact that they played exactly into what we wanted and expected by this time from superhero movies. That is, play the whole multiverse card that got us all excited, and eventually it was just a flipping bird to the audience that just played with our expectations, and this film deserves kudos for that alone. It also gives us a lot of time with Peter Parker as Peter Parker, exploring his personal life as he's trying to confess his feelings for MJ throughout this film, and it's just really sweet, really wholesome, and I love the whole European vacation vibe to it, from Prague to Italy to eventually London, which I always have a soft spot for when I see London in films. It keeps up with this consistent arc for Peter Parker, and once more Tom Holland is excellent in the role. Jake Gyllenhaal kills it as Mysterio. It's just a film that overall looks great. There are a few questions when it comes to Mysterio's overall plan, like if he succeeds in this thing that he's doing right now, what's next? And I just don't buy that he'll be successful in the long run. And while I understand why it bothers some people that we have yet another Tony Stark influenced villain in this one, to me, 2 is fine. Tony Stark was a person that had a lot of influence in a lot of places. Had we gotten a third Tony Stark villain, maybe that would have been too much. But Mysterio really works. It's a really smartly written character, again, apart from his long-term plan, and a villain that makes an impact by the end of the film by revealing Spider-Man's identity to the world. Before we step into the top 3 Spider-Man movies, don't forget to let me know your ranking in the comments below. Start the conversation, because it's always the most important part. And feel free to add the Venom movies, like I said. Feel free to give me your MCU ranking with the Spider-Man Home trilogy. Anything and everything, just add them down there. And remember, because if you like this and don't want to miss any future conversation on your favorite movies and TV, click that subscribe button, because if you like movies and TV, this is the place to be. Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse breaks us into the top 3, an incredibly imaginative, creative, and all-around unique Spider-Man movie in itself, where it mixes so many characters into it and messes with the whole notion of multiverse, and it does it so well, with groundbreaking visuals for its story, where Miles Morales is moving at 12 frames per second while the rest of the characters are moving at 24 frames. It gives us a brand new, unique Spider-Man story that feels personal, feels intimate, but has all these spectacular things going on around it, and such unique Spider-Man around them. From Spider-Man Noir to Spider-Gwen to Peter B. Parker to Penny Parker and even Spider-Ham. It's funny, it's exciting, it has this kind of dark edge to it, as right at the beginning we see a Spider-Man die, and that's what thrusts Miles Morales into greatness and his whole arc throughout this film and throughout what his dad is trying to teach him. And it's such a compelling arc for this character, toward the point where the leap of faith recurring theme keeps coming back and keeps adding so much weight to the journey of this character, to when we finally see him becoming Spider-Man by trusting himself. It's a beautiful moment and gives extreme catharsis. It's also the first Spider-Man movie that actually shows us that a Spider-Man film with a ton of characters and a ton of things going on could actually work. It could be fun, it could be true to the character, and could be as exciting as it is compelling. At number 2, we have Spider-Man 2. This is the hot take of the year. I understand. Hear me out. Spider-Man 2 is a revolutionary comic book movie. For the longest time, it has been the best Spider-Man movie, and this might just be recency bias. In the future, I may change my mind again, so come back for that future ranking. This is just a stellar film in every way. Doc Ock is a richly compelling villain with an interesting relationship with Peter Parker that affects him not only as Spider-Man, it affects him personally, deeply, from beginning to end of the film. That to me is what makes him the best Spider-Man villain still of all time. And the pressure that Peter Parker faces in this film is naturally and organically bigger than the one in the first film, where that one feeds into this one as his best friend hates him without knowing that he hates him. His relationship is going through trouble. Now he's got this potential mentor that has turned to the dark side, and he's trying to save him, and keeping this balance takes away the powers from him and the existential crisis he goes through. And I think it's all so expertly done and so evenly balanced throughout the film. It does a fantastic job at putting into perspective how the Spider-Man life affects Peter Parker and vice versa, and it does such a great job at playing with that duality and us seeing the consequences of that duality and how it affects his life. We also get a ton of J. Jonah Jameson in this film, which is excellent. That it is one of the best castings in anything ever. This film still has one of my favorite moments, which is the best fake laugh in film history.
You serious?
What keeps this one back slightly is just I never care that much about the relationship of Peter Parker and Mary Jane Watson. Not that I don't want to see them together, I just don't think that's the best part of this film. It's fine, it's good. I know, knowing these characters, that Peter Parker and Mary Jane Watson belong together. They're the true ship of the Spider-Man story. But it's just never caught me that much emotionally. At number 1 by rule of elimination, Spider-Man No Way Home. Why this is a number 1 is because I asked myself this question to make the final decision, because it was only between this and Spider-Man 2. This final decision came down to when I asked myself if I could only watch one Spider-Man movie for the rest of my life. If I had to choose, which one would it be? It would be this one. It gives incredible catharsis to Tom Holland's Spider-Man. It puts him through the ringer. It's emotionally compelling. It's dramatically rich. It never forgets to focus on what is affecting this character's life. And it actually puts him in a position where it makes him the actual villain of his film. This is all he's doing. This film, it's Peter Parker learning to grow up the hard way. He tries to get around things, the eventual reveal of his identity. He tries to get around things, trying to get into MIT. He doesn't want to deal with the consequences. He doesn't want to take ownership and responsibility. And so the more mistakes he makes, the consequences accumulate and accumulate and accumulate, and more problems emerge until he loses everything. Not only that, for obvious reasons, we're going to talk about spoilers now, it gives us great catharsis for the other Spider-Man. It gives him not only one last hurrah, it gives us not only a great moment as fans, but it continues their arcs and the villains' arcs as well. And it fulfills some of the promise that those Spider-Men have. And catching him now, at this moment in their lives, how they've evolved from the last time we see them, and what they have to teach to one another. I also love origin stories, and in the recontextualization of this film, by the end, this was an origin story for the Spider-Man that we know and love, the friendly neighborhood, the hero that is always alone, and ultimately it is Peter Parker that does choose to make the ultimate sacrifice, and he chooses to let go of everything because it's the best way to keep everyone safe, both in his personal life and everything in his superhero life. And so he becomes a new man. He finally grows up. He finally learns that with great power comes great responsibility. Besides that, it also gives me my favorite kind of story, where it has this gigantic scope with multiverse and drastic consequences that affect everything and everyone around him in the cinematic universe that he's in. It brings us all these different villains and continues their arcs from their last appearances, but it has this intimate, personal scope. This is the most personal, intimate, and emotionally driven Spider-Man story, where he loses everything and has to choose to lose everything so he can save himself and the people he loves. And so that is my probably very controversial Spider-Man ranking, but I want to know what you thought. How much do you hate my choices? What is your ranking? Anything and everything down there in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching. You are the best. Stay tuned for many more videos to come. There's a Sing 2 review, a Matrix Resurrections review, a Don't Look Up review, and then all the top 10 movies by the end of the year. I hope to see you in those. Check out the Spider-Man No Way Home spoiler review, the spoiler-free review, the post-credit scene explained, and I hope to see you in any of those. So until the next one, love each other and love the movies.